All right, let's get things going. I imagine we'll have a few new people that will probably filter in the next few minutes. I want to make sure that we use everyone's time wisely. So welcome everyone to our webinar today. The topic that we're talking about today is behind the scenes, what happens after you submit your application. So we are planning to take you behind the scenes of the entire admission process, all the way from you submitting your application to finally getting your admission decision. So myself and our other two panelists, Steve and Danielle, are going to be discussing how this all works and also using specific examples from the colleges that each of us worked at during our admission careers. So with that, let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. Steve, do you want to go first?
Hi, everyone. My name is Steve Zatarain. I am a full-time advisor here at Logic Prep. I'm really excited to have a chance to demystify some of the application process with you today. As Olivia shared, prior to my work with Logic Prep, I was working as an admissions officer for Middlebury College, a small liberal arts college located in Vermont for students who are really interested in the outdoors and thinking about the environment. It's a great place to consider. I'll pass it to Danielle.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle McColgan. I am a former admissions officer from New York University. So definitely a very large school that is very globally minded and very focused on global experiences and attracting students who have a wide variety of interests in terms of major, in terms of what they want to pursue in life. So a very exciting place to be. And I'm really excited to kind of talk through our committee process. And I will hand it over to Olivia to give a brief introduction to herself as well.
Awesome. Thank you both. As Danielle mentioned, my name is Olivia. I'm also one of our full-time admissions college advisors here at Logic Prep. I used to work at College of the Holy Cross, which, like Middlebury, is a small liberal arts focused college in the Northeast, but it also has the added benefit of being a Jesuit focused college and a Catholic focused college. So that also brings to play a different element within the admissions process as well. So we'll be discussing some of that today too. All right. And so moving on, we're going to go through what we're going to talk about today. We're going to start with just an overview of what the application materials are. So especially for those of you who are maybe a year or two removed from actually applying to college, you may not really know what you need to submit. And in order for you to understand what admissions officers are looking at when they read your application, you need to know what those application materials are. So we'll go over that really quickly. And then we're going to jump right into case studies. So we'll start with Holy Cross. So I'll talk about the school that I worked at and kind of how our committee and reading process worked at Holy Cross. From there, I'll pass it over to Steve to discuss more in depth how the process worked at Middlebury. You'll notice some similarities and some differences between Holy Cross and Middlebury. And then we'll finally pass it to Danielle to talk about NYU, which has a very different admission process to the liberal arts model. So I think it'll be a good contrast for all of you to see. So let's jump in. First and foremost, what are you going to submit to colleges when you get to that point? The first thing is the transcript. And in most cases for admissions readers, this is the first piece of your application that they read. The transcript is sort of the basis that all the rest of your application is built around. Your transcript shows your grades from 9th grade through at least the end of 11th grade, sometimes the beginning of 12th grade as well, depending on when you're applying. And that is the foundational academic piece of your application. So it is really, really important to have a strong transcript when you apply. The second piece that colleges typically see is the recommendation letters from your high school counselor and from your teachers. Typically, colleges will ask for a letter from your counselor as well as a letter from either one or two of your academic teachers at your school. There are also some cases where you might get to submit additional letters of recommendation, possibly from a coach, from an employer, potentially from a third teacher, depending on your interests and what you're applying for at the school. That's typically the second piece that college admission officers will see. And then from there, they dive into the actual application form itself. So this is the form that you will fill out with all of your information. And this is the piece that you have the most control over. Other than, working hard in your classes to make good grades, the application form is the piece that you actually get to write and show colleges. And on the application form, that contains your personal information. So who are you? Where are you from? Where do you go to high school? All that kind of stuff. Any honors or awards that you may have won at your school or perhaps in your community, even sometimes nationally or internationally for some students. Testing, if applicable. So as many of you may know, a lot of colleges are currently test optional and maintaining that through at least the next couple of years. So you may or may not have testing in your application, depending on which schools you're applying to and how strong your testing is. And then this also includes your activities list, which is where you get to list out all of the activities and interesting things that you have done during the course of your high school career. And finally, essays. This is typically the last thing that we look at on the application form, and it's the opportunity for you to really express your personality, your goals, your interests, and your passion for the school that you're applying to, your passion for the area of academics that you want to study, anything like that. There also is some additional information that many college admission officers look at outside of transcript, recommendation letters, and the application form. And that includes things like demonstrated interest. So if a college does take demonstrated interest into account, they may look at things like, have you visited campus? Have you attended any virtual sessions, online info sessions, or program sessions that the school has put on? Have you communicated with your admissions officer? Have you been checking your applicant portal since you applied and looking to make sure that everything is complete? All of those different pieces can take into account for demonstrated interest. Similarly to that, saved communications. So if you have been emailing back and forth with someone in the admissions office, oftentimes those emails are saved and added to your file so that we can see that you've really been engaging with a lot of our admission officers, asking questions or checking to make sure that your application is complete. And those communications can help as well. And then lastly, in some cases, you may have a unique relationship or status at a college. This could be something like being a recruited athlete. Perhaps you are the child of an employee at the college or the child of an alumni from the college. Perhaps you have an older sibling that attends that college. So those relationships are also taken into account at the end of the process as well. And that's everything that we look at throughout the admissions process. So to dive into our first case study, I'm going to talk about College of the Holy Cross. And first, we're going to talk about our reading process through College of the Holy Cross. So there are two main ways to do application reading. The first is traditional reading. The second is team-based or committee-based reading. And Steve's going to talk about team-based reading since that's a system that Middlebury has used. Holy Cross is very much using the traditional reading format. And what that means is we have a first reader and a second reader. So after you submit your application, it gets funneled into a pile that gets sent to the first reader. And at Holy Cross, the first reader is determined alphabetically. So for example, I might be assigned to read all of the applications that are last names A through D. And the first reader's job is to summarize the entire application and give an overall impression of what they learned from that student. And then when they've done that, they send it to the second reader. The second reader for Holy Cross was always by territory. So that means that if I were in charge of all the high schools in Massachusetts, for example, which would never happen because that would be a lot. But if I were in charge of all the high schools from Massachusetts, then all of the high schools from Massachusetts, after those applications had been read a first time, would get sent to me. And I would be in charge of reading that second time. And my goal as a second reader would be to confirm the impression from the first reader and correct any errors that they may have made in their read of the application. Each reader, the first and second reader, will put an academic rating and a personal rating for each student. So the academic rating really summarizes transcript, test scores if they were available, the rigor of the curriculum that the student was taking. So how many advanced classes are you pushing yourself to take? And we would summarize that within the context of the student's high school. And then the personal rating summarizes all the other pieces of the application. You know, what kind of person are you? What kind of goals do you have? Do you show those personal qualities that we're looking for of being really intellectually curious and trying new things and being a mature and reflective student? We also would include a narrative to that as well. So it's not just a number. There's also a narrative description that really talks about here are the main things that we learned from this application, and this is the main takeaway that we have from this student. Now, the time for this is pretty quick, although not as quick as some other colleges, as you'll see soon. We typically would have about 5 to 10 minutes for a first read to really dive into the application, and then about 3 to 6 minutes for a second read, because a lot of the initial work has been done for you, and you're just confirming what happens. So in that span of time, you have at a maximum about 16 minutes worth of application reading for you to stand out to an admissions officer at a place like Holy Cross. After that, applications get funneled into the committee process. And at Holy Cross, we actually would do a full committee for every single student. So that means that every person who works in the admission office and reads files would sit in committee and review students together. So it might look the way that you would expect an admission committee to look. There's about 13 people sitting around a room, reviewing applications together and making decisions as a group. Because we reviewed every student, some decisions were made very quickly. Anytime we would see a student that was super academically qualified, super personally interesting, it was a pretty quick decision for us to say, yes, we're going to admit that student. And similarly, on the other end, if we had students that came up that were clearly not very academically prepared, not very personally compelling, those were very quick decisions to say, no, we're going to deny that student. Where we spent the most of our time was what we called the muddy middle, which is those students that are sort of in the middle. They're pretty good at academics, they're pretty interesting personally, but they don't stand out too much in either direction. And that's where the committee process comes into play to really help figure out which of those students need to be at Holy Cross and which of those students might benefit from going to a different college. Then lastly, some of the key evaluation points that we managed here. We would pay a lot of attention to academic preparedness. At any highly selective school, this is super important. That's step number one. If you are not prepared academically for the college, it's going to be really hard for you to shine in that committee process and actually make it through to the admit pile. We also would look a lot at fit. So we'd look at liberal arts fit for the liberal arts institution, as well as our Jesuit mission. And so that is, talking about things like intellectual curiosity. Are you curious about your environment? Are you trying new things? Do you have a variety of interests? A lot of our students will double major in math and sociology and also pick up a minor in Spanish. So we're looking for those students that really have a variety of interests. And then lastly, particularly as a Jesuit Catholic institution, we care a lot about students being community and or service oriented. So those are some of the things we would really look for. And then personally, we also really like to see reflection, a sense of compassion, and a sense of maturity from the students that we admitted to the pool. All right, I'm going to pass it on to Steve to take over for Middlebury.
Yes, so Middlebury utilizes, as Olivia shared earlier, a team-based reading process. Team-based evaluations are when two admissions counselors review and split the materials that we went over earlier in half, and each counselor review those materials separately and then have a conversation about your application. They are providing ratings and also a narrative as they're going through this process. Something I'd like to highlight in Middlebury's case, that the regional counselor is often the person who's the expert on your academic rating because they're very familiar with the curricular rigor of schools and your transcript strength, specific territory that they're applying to. While the second reader, the other counselor, is really looking at your social impact and narrative, and really they're engaging with this back and forth of thinking through a couple aspects of how admissible you are for their institution. One thing that they use as part of this process, oftentimes, and Middlebury does as well, is thinking through kind of a history of data. So Middlebury and other institutions also utilize kind of a 5-year history to place the strength of your strength of your application in comparison to others in different rounds in which you're applying. So that's early decision, early action, regular decision. Something I just want to highlight is team-based evaluations are often quick. The length of evaluations can range from as long as 4 minutes to as quick as 45 seconds. So it's fast. which can often be intimidating when you hear that 45 seconds. And I would say that the speed of your evaluation is often correlated with the grades on your 9th through 12th transcript and the round in which you're applying. So oftentimes for folks who are applying in early decision, they're given a little bit more grace in terms of evaluation. But I want to say that your transcript is not 100% predeterminate of how much time you will be given in this evaluation. Really a team-based evaluation reading process, it's really important to reveal a hook. Those are applications that are often the most successful or fit very quickly in the reviewing process to really help, quote unquote, fight back for time. What that looks like can be the rigor of your IB or AP course selection, right? That's one way to really heighten a team-based evaluations reading pairs interest in your application and maybe want them to really meditate a little bit more on your transcript and other aspects of your application. Really, your social impact is also a way in which you could really fight back for time by participating in something that is unique or new and not shying away from potential different activities that may seem risky to try out, because when an admissions counselor sees something that is new and invigorating, they're excited to learn a little bit more about you and that. So in team-based evaluation and reading, Middlebury is spending time trying to make the decision in that moment early on if you will be either denied or waitlist or move forward. So in that first conversation in team-based evaluations, they're determining that. If you are moved forward, that is when a group of subcommittees, so groups of about 4 to 5 admissions counselors are reviewing your application once again. Then you'll have a further conversation to see if you are someone that they are excited to admit, waitlist, or deny. Really, this goes to reiterate how team-based evaluations is geared towards hoping to catch or find students who have strong fits for the institution as part of, quickly revealing aspects of your application that makes you stand out. Now, some things that Middlebury specifically were looking for in their evaluation. Middlebury is a liberal arts college, and they're looking for students from a wide variety of, academic interests, ones that they have explored and hope to continue exploring. For example, someone who's excited to major in political science, who've been deeply involved with environmentalism, economics majors who have explored neuroscience, maybe a published writer who might want to major in biology. Those are just some shorthands of ways in which Middlebury is looking for a liberal arts fit, right, in your application that could come out through a wide variety of different parts of your application. Something that is really important to Middlebury is that no matter what your major is, reading and writing is really important. So the committee will spend lots of time and lots of attention in looking at your English grades and SAT scores if you do submit them. Also for students who are international students applying, they will really take in consideration your TOEFL scores, your Duolingo scores, and IELTS scores, because they want to make sure you're able to participate in the high level of reading and writing that liberal arts colleges often entail. The last component I just want to highlight is that liberal arts colleges often really are looking for and learning about what type of community member you are. That's something we look for a lot in the Middlebury review process, both in team-based evaluations and then also in our subcommittee process. That's because liberal arts colleges tend to have very robust residential experiences. They're asking themselves what kind of student you are in the classroom, what kind of student will you be if you come to our campus. They are asking themselves, how do you spend your time? How would you describe your relationships to others? How do your recommenders describe you as a class member, community member, right? Some phrases that they're looking for or hoping to really circle around to think about to determine that level of community orientedness is looking through and hopefully seeing things such as this student is a classroom leader, or this student is an integral campus member, or this student has been the leading person impacting X cause, right? So these are some of the ways in which Middlebury's process and team-based evaluations are considering the type of community-oriented person you are as they think through whether or not they want to admit you as a student. So that's a little bit about MID. I'll pass it over to Danielle.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. So in terms of the committee and the review process at NYU, it is a traditional reading process for the most part. So you can see I have that little asterisk there on this slide, and we'll kind of break down exactly what that means as we go through. But in terms of that traditional first read, that is conducted by the regional counselor that is very familiar with your specific geographic location and particularly the school context in your region, meaning they know a lot about the specific high schools that are maybe in your state or in your country and everything like that. So the first reader's job is really to assess all of the core components of your application, right? So kind of like what Olivia and Steve referred to, right? At NYU, we're looking at your academics, your extracurricular involvement, what we call personal qualities. So how you express yourself in your writing, how your teachers describe you in terms of the soft skills that you have, like your leadership skills and your proactive nature. So really putting yourself out there in the classroom, right? And based on all of those three different components, then we kind of give you a final summary based on the overall application and those three areas. So that is really what a first reader is focusing on. It's really diving deeply into those three components and then giving an overall sense of the application. So that first read typically can last anywhere between 3 to 10 minutes. I would say the average for a first reader at NYU is about 5 minutes per application, right? So still rather quick in terms of, the process overall, but we really are working very hard, in the first reader process to pull out as much detail as possible. And I think it's really important to have a clear identity in your application. So kind of what Steve referenced as a hook, right? So kind of when I used to go through an application, I would think to myself, does this person's academics, maybe their future plans, their extracurriculars, and their reason for why they want to come to NYU all align to create a really cohesive and understandable application identity? Do I get a really strong sense of what is unique and what is, really interesting about this specific applicant? Right. So after assessing those things, the first reader can recommend an admit decision, a deny decision, or a waitlist decision, or they can pass your application along to committee for your first choice program, your second choice, or your third choice program, because NYU is a college that actually allows you to choose more than one program and major of interest. So that first reader, as I mentioned, can make final decisions. So either an admit, a deny, or a waitlist, but the majority of applications will be sent to committee for additional application review. So essentially this kind of means, and this is why there's an asterisk, there is no second reader. The committee really acts as the second read and the committee all in one, right? So when an NYU application is sent to committee, it will go to a committee that is specifically for the NYU school or college that you are applying to. So out of, say, the 20 to 25 admissions officers that are working at NYU at any given time, there are typically about 2 to 3 officers per committee that correspond to each NYU school or college. So that means that there is a Stern School of Business committee, a College of Arts and Science committee, a Tisch School of the Arts committee, et cetera, and so forth for all of those different 10 schools and colleges at NYU. So these committees are the ones who are making the final decision on all of the applications that they receive from all of those first readers, and they are evaluating folks using, I would say, the following key evaluation points in addition to that narrative summary that first reader has indicated. So some of the key evaluation points that we really look for, especially in the committee process at NYU, are, first and foremost, I would say interest in NYU that is not simply tied to the desire to live in New York City. So it is awesome, such an incredible benefit for the fact that NYU is located in New York City. There's so much opportunity, to do internships, to, just enjoy the social life, to be able to have access to so many different resources. And it's great that if you want to take advantage of the city and its resources, but you do not want to mention general New York City activities, before you mention NYU specific activities and resources. So for example, I always say, and something I would read a lot is students would be really excited to say in their Why NYU application essays, I really want to go to New York University because I'm so excited by Broadway. I really want to come and spend my 4 years at a school where I can see a Broadway show every single week, right? So instead, what I would recommend is really thinking about how you want to tie in your specific interests that you may have in New York City to NYU. So maybe that's something like, I want to one day work on Broadway. So I will use NYU's drama program and their curriculum and their amazing professors and resources to make that dream come true. So it's all about just integrating your interest in NYU into the city and making sure that those two fit together. Another thing that we really look for in the committee process and also in that first reader process is a fit for the college or the major that you are applying to and a love of the liberal arts. So regardless of your major at NYU, so regardless if you're a business major, if you're a media and communications major, if you're an art major, you will still have to take a core curriculum. So that would be your classes like a math class, a natural science class, history, English. That kind of is typically what is thought of as a core curriculum, meaning the classes you'll have to take during your first year of college. And those are considered liberal arts classes. So due to this, you have to be the kind of student who not only loves and is very excited about and very passionate about your specific and selected major and program, but you also have to articulate some appreciation for the liberal arts foundation that NYU gives you. So some ways to demonstrate this are talking about what classes in the core curriculum you might be looking forward to in that YNYU essay, and explaining that how that will help you in your specific major. And just in general, as you're preparing to go through the college process, focusing on having as strong grades as possible across disciplines. So not just in the areas that you are particularly interested in. And I think one of the other things that is really, really important is the idea of having a global mindset. So it's important to mention, if that's something that you're interested in, NYU study abroad opportunities, because they are many. And when we're in committee, we really are looking for somebody who wants to take advantage of those global opportunities that NYU is really known for. And I think another sort of piece that kind of fits into that in terms of a global mindset is also a readiness to live in a major city in the United States. So for example, if you're writing in your personal statement about how you love small, quiet towns and you can't wait to settle down and have a very traditional college experience, that would be probably something that me as a reader, especially as a first reader or even in committee, that would make me concerned about your fit for living in New York City and attending a school like NYU. So make sure that you really research school well and articulate your excitement for going to NYU, even though it doesn't have that traditional college campus and does require a certain level of proactiveness and excitement and maturity, I would say, to understand that you're going to have lots of opportunities at your fingertips and just really be thoughtful and intentional about your excitement around living in that non-traditional sort of college environment. So I will pass it back to Olivia to go through some key takeaways.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. I feel like that was really great to do a deep dive on each of those colleges and some of the different ways that schools can review applications. I hope that was helpful for all of you in our audience. To wrap up, we really just want to give you a few of the key takeaways that we want you to leave this presentation understanding. The first one is that application review happens fast. I think all three of us mentioned that the reading process can be incredibly short. Even the committee process can be incredibly short as well. And so make sure that you have a strong attention grabbing hook in your application. You really want to be able to stand out right away from the first moment that an application reader opens your application. So, challenging yourself in really difficult courses and having excellent grades in those courses, that definitely helps you stand out. Having an amazingly well-written essay that is engaging and interesting or creative also can help you stand out. Having awards or activities that show your leadership and show your really strong interest in the areas that you care about, that can also help you stand out. So make sure that you have at least one thing in your application, no matter what, that really will help you stand out from the many thousands of applicants that we're all reading each year. The second key takeaway, at some colleges, the major or program selection matters a lot. And this is really specifically talking about the experience that Danielle discussed with NYU, right? You want to choose your first, second, or third choice programs strategically. It does not make sense for you to select a less selective program as your first choice major and then a more selective program as your second choice major, because that more selective program does not need the students that choose it second. They have enough students that are applying that choose it first, right? And the same goes for a lot of larger universities. So you can generalize this NYU experience out to a lot of other large universities where you are applying to a specific program, right? So you want to make sure that you are selecting those programs strategically. For small liberal arts colleges like Holy Cross, like Middlebury, it doesn't matter quite as much what major you choose because it tends to be a bit more fluid between the different majors that are offered. So you don't need to worry about that as much at a liberal arts college, but if you're applying to larger universities that have a lot of schools and programs within them, you definitely want to choose your selections carefully. And then lastly, the comparisons that we make within admission reading and within the committee process are general. They're not one-to-one. So I know some students have the impression that you are going up directly against the people that are at your high school or the people that have graduated from your high school over the past couple of years, and that is your main source of competition. In some cases, that's kind of true, but it tends to be a lot more general than that. So we're not really going to look and say, okay, let's read this application and then let's compare it to the strongest application that we've read so far this year from this high school, and we're gonna look at them together. Nobody ever does that. So what you really want to do is emphasize the positive qualities that make you stand out from your peers, because each applicant that we read is unique, is a different person with different interests and different experiences. So we can't make those direct comparisons between one applicant and another, because each person comes from a totally different experience of life and a totally different goal that they have for the college. So you really want to focus on emphasizing what makes you unique, what makes you interesting, what are the things you love, because those are often the things that will help you to stand out and get chosen by colleges that think you will be the best fit for their school. All right. Thank you all for bearing with us through all of these long slides that we did here. We are going to open it up to Q&A. We have about 25 minutes left in our hour today. So please, by all means, put some questions in the Q&A. We really want to give you the opportunity to ask us the things that you're curious about. We are going to start by actually addressing a couple of the questions that were sent in ahead of time when you all registered. And one of the first ones was actually around how test optional applications are reviewed, and asking, what really goes on in the admission process if you choose not to submit a test score, and what does that look like? So I want to give both Steve and Danielle a chance to address that question.
Yeah, I could jump in first to get us started. Whenever we saw an applicant apply to Middlebury test optional, we took it as face value as being test optional. And what that meant is we were looking for other data points to let us know what your academic abilities were. So that is spending a little bit more time, effort, and energy weighing your grades on your transcript and the rigor of the courses that you're taking more. So for kind of a takeaway from that statement is, if you are applying test optional to an institution, your admissions counselor will probably be really thinking hard about what classes have you chosen, how have you really challenged yourself in the context of your high school to really take on rigor, and then how have you performed in that classroom? And those would be some of the data points they will utilize on top of that academic history I talked a little bit about earlier to see where you're falling in terms of the strength of your application admissibility to the institution.
Yeah, and I would just echo exactly what Steve said in that we're really looking at every other aspect that we've discussed, then the academics, the extracurriculars, the personal, the personal statement, as well as your essays with an even more critical lens, right? And we don't, it's never that, we penalize you for not submitting test scores. As Steve said, we kind of just take it at face value. We don't ask questions we don't have questions in our minds as to why you didn't submit, but everything else in the application then becomes just that much more important to really try your best on and to really, represent, your best self in that process.
Awesome. Thank you both. I don't think I have anything to add to that. So one of our other questions that was sent in ahead of time, can any essay be a good essay just by the author's writing skills, or does the content of the essay matter more than how you write it?
I can
go for it. Go for it. Yeah, you got that.
Awesome. So I would definitely say it has to be a balance, at least in my opinion, and the way that we read at NYU, that it has to, strike that balance between being a narrative or a story or an experience that is impactful or that is meaningful personally to you, or that's funny, something that feels authentic to you. So I would say when you have that kind of like that core theme that's really exciting and that you feel excited to write, and the writing is really strong, that's really I think the desirable balance. So I think I have read essays in the past that, in terms of the writing, that they're really technically good, right? And it does, and, I have certainly, like, as a first reader and even in committee, been, excited about somebody else's, like, other aspects of their application. But I think I've been even more excited to then, make a really positive decision in committee or as a first reader if the applicant has both good content and good writing. So I personally think that you do need that balance of both based on my experience.
Yeah, the only thing I'll just add is in terms of content, really what admissions counselors are yearning to learn more about is what is not already showing up on your application, right? What is not present from all the other pieces of materials that are being sent in. And then to Danielle's point, we're also going to think about what kind of writer you are. At least, as I mentioned earlier, liberal arts institutions want to make sure they're accepting people who are strong writers. So that is an aspect that we'll consider.
Awesome. Yeah, I totally agree with you guys. I definitely think someone who is a strong writer can make just about any topic interesting. But definitely the topic that you choose is important because, like Steve said, you don't want to just reiterate things that are already in your application. You want to share something new. So you want to make that the focus of your essays for sure. I want to address one of the live questions that we got, which is, can we discuss the weight given to AP courses versus dual enrollment courses within the review process? I think that's a great question. Do either of you feel compelled to answer it?
Yeah, we weighed them very similarly. I think that's something that stood out to us. I think the one difference is for AP courses, you have the option to take an AP exam at the end, which is also potentially an additional data point to send in, especially for students who perform very well on the AP subjects that they are testing that they do. If they're not applying with SATs or ACTs, it could be an additional way to leverage something that is a successful score and an interesting positive data point if you score well on that to share with institutions.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what Steve said. I think at NYU, they were definitely weighted the same. I think the benefit of the AP courses sometimes is exactly what Steve is saying, is that it's more standardized, right? So everybody who's taking an AP class, regardless of where you are, you're kind of going through the same curriculum. And so I think, and then you're ultimately taking likely, an AP exam. So I think that that can be helpful. But in terms of like weight of those two, different, options, they're given about the same weight in the process.
Yeah, I would say the same from my experience as well. The other thing to keep in mind too is that both of those options give you the ability to earn college credit while you're in high school and then apply that college credit when you're in college. So that can be helpful from either the AP or dual enrollment perspective, is the ability to bring college credit when you start at your chosen university. And that's pretty much the same across both of those. So it's good to know. Although one thing to note too is that most selective universities only accept college credit for either a 4 or a 5 on the AP exam. Usually it's quite rare for colleges to accept 3s. So you may be able to earn that college credit a little bit more easily through the dual enrollment program, since you don't have to get a specific metric on a test. As long as you pass the class, that can typically be considered as long as you have a strong grade in the class. So if you're a stronger tester, then the AP might be a better route for you. But if you're not as strong of a tester, then dual enrollment might be a better route for you, depending on the options available. All right. And then we also have someone wanted a little bit more clarification about the program selection and more selective versus less selective courses. So I'm really glad that you asked this question. One of the things that I think we can kind of clarify is that first and foremost, you should select your first choice program as your first choice program. If the favorite program that you have is the least selective of the 3 that you're considering, you should still put that one first, because that's where you want to be. And that's where you'll be happiest if you get accepted. So I just want to put that out there for you all. Please focus on making sure that you're choosing your favorite programs first. But what Danielle and I were more referring to is if you're sort of in between or on the fence between 2 different programs, you like them equally, you're not sure which one you like the best, then it would, at least at a place like NYU, it makes more sense to put the more selective of the 2 programs first, and then the less selective of the 2 second. Danielle, did you want to add anything else about that?
Yeah, so I can actually give an example that I think might help, kind of ground this discussion. So for example, if you are somebody who is really interested in applying to, as your first choice, the College of Arts and Science engineering program. So they have a general like engineering degree in the College of Arts and Science, right? And you put that as your first choice. That is College of Arts and Science in general is one of the most applied to schools and colleges at NYU. So it definitely tends to be more competitive. Then we have at NYU, there's also the Tandon School of Engineering, and they have like some really, really specific, like very like niche programs. Like one that comes to mind is engineering for game design. Right. So if you're somebody who is like a potential game designer and you want to go to NYU and you're kind of thinking, I like both of these programs, they both have really cool offerings, it would be kind of in your best interest to maybe put the more selective one as your first choice if they're both like equal in your eyes. Like I would be happy to go to either of these programs, because then in terms of like what Olivia was saying about, in terms of if you choose a second choice program that already has, the sort of the selectivity that a College of Arts and Science has, it would be less attractive or less likely that as a first reader, if I didn't think you were a good fit for, the game design program at the engineering school, that I would then refer you to the College of Arts and Science. But it could really make sense as a first reader if I feel like your profile isn't exactly strong enough or the best fit for the College of Arts and Science, it would make sense for you to say, oh, well, they put this like other program that's a little more underrated, like in terms of the amount of applications that it receives. I would love to refer this person to this other program. So definitely pick the major and the college at, whatever big university that you really want first, but just kind of be aware if you are in that situation where you're kind of going for 2 very similar programs that just happen to be in different schools or colleges within the university, that that just pay attention to sort of the distribution between those.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then we have an interesting question actually from one of our Brazilian students. So they've heard many times that the transcript in GPA is not as competitive if you're at a Brazilian curriculum school because of the way that they grade at Brazilian curriculum schools, and wanting to know how they can make their application shine more, considering that they can't change the grading system. One thing that I will tell you, anonymous student, is that a lot of colleges that are used to receiving lots of applicants from Brazil, they are also familiar with the grading scales and the curriculums used at Brazilian high schools. And so if you're applying to colleges that are familiar with the Brazilian curriculum, you will be recognized as being a top student at your school, and you will be sort of given the credit for all of the hard work that you've put in, even though your grades or GPA might seem lower than a comparable student at a US high school. So just keep that in mind. Like, we do pay a lot of attention to the specific curriculum and how the grading system works at each high school. So if you're applying to colleges that are familiar with that program, you shouldn't have to worry about it too much for academics. If you are applying to some colleges that maybe don't have as much familiarity with Brazilian curriculum high schools, then you may run into some issues of them not really recognizing the amount of effort it takes to get that grade of an 8, for example, out of 10. So that might be something to be aware of and discuss with your counselor as well. But I'm curious to know, I guess, what are some other ways that you can make your application shine outside of academics, just in general?
Yeah, I'll add something I just want to share is, building really strong relationships with your teachers who potentially are your future recommenders and your high school counselors, because the admissions counselors who are reviewing your applications, both in that first round of reading and then also in the committee, will be looking for the type of academic student you are. And you want these teachers to be very effusive. You want them to use very strong language to describe you as being a top student or extraordinarily strong individual when it comes to the subject of mathematics or the subject of English literature, right? And you want your high school counselor to be like, this student is a standout. They are performing at the top of their class and have also made major waves at our school. Those are things that admissions counselors will read and deeply integrate and really put into either their narrative as they're describing why you should be an awesome student, to be like, check out these teacher recommendations. They're some of the strongest I've seen this year, or may also impact the rating, right? You may get a stronger rating because they're seeing some key descriptors like that to help you stand out. So that is one of the things I'd like to say that you have lots of control over, right? You have the control of really building a strong relationship with these key people who you'll potentially be asking for recommendations from in the future.
Yeah, I would definitely echo exactly what Steve said. Don't really have too much more to add on that one, except for, especially in the case of NYU, in terms of that shine factor. I think that for us specifically, like what really made sort of the needle move on decision, so meaning that it really impacted how excited I was in committee to actually press that admit button, was really just the passion that you have for the school. Like, to me, that was one of those things that if I was reading in committee where we're sorting through applications that have come from all around the world, right? If somebody was a little bit, not lower on the academic side, but exactly what you're describing, in that, maybe the direct translation of a GPA from a school from another country wasn't exactly, like a 4.0 on the American scale. If I really saw that the person had an amazing, reason for wanting to come to NYU and really had done their research and really was mentioning all of the programs and the clubs and, all of the different things that they wanted to experience and really articulated that well, that was always something that really helped me, advocate for a student to be admitted in that case.
Awesome. Yeah, I will third that. I think there really is no substitute for just pure enthusiasm in your application. Like, that is something that application readers can always feel, is when you are just simply so excited about a particular college or program or whatever, that really resonates with us as admission counselors, because we want the students that want to be here, right? I think that's an important thing to remember too. And definitely like let that come out in your writing and in your interviews if that's applicable for the schools you're applying to. Awesome. We also have another question about asking about the difference between the selection process from international students to domestic students. And now I have only worked with international students on the Logic Prep college advising side of things. I did not read applications for international students when I worked at Holy Cross. But I'm curious, Danielle or Steve, do either of you feel like you have a good perspective from your institutions of how that, that application process was maybe a little different?
Yeah, really the major difference, and we touched on this earlier, is kind of go through the same application review process with the same kind of notes that we're using, with some very small key differences, if applicable. Duolingo, IELTS, TOEFL scores incorporated, because we were reviewing and seeing if students were able to keep up with the pace of English that will be required at these institutions, which those scores are reflective of, and we can make a determination based off of. And the other thing is really just thinking about, for international students, their curriculum, right? And the thing that I want to underscore and reiterate is these institutions have tons of data and lots of familiarity with different regional and international curriculum. So I think you'd be surprised by how much of an expert someone who's reviewing, applicants from, Central or Latin America are to any specific institution, because there's tons of historical knowledge and data that these institutions hold. So yeah.
Yeah, and I would just say that I think the one of the biggest differences is obviously just that extra, data point in terms of receiving English language testing and assessing your readiness to participate in, an English curriculum at, a very selective university is something that we're looking at. And I think a good way to just be mindful of this outside of even just the TOEFL and IELTS and Duolingo and all of that is to just really in your application, obviously, I think the majority of students, I would say, get their essays proofread by, maybe their counselor or a teacher or a friend, which is great. You should always do that. But also make sure that in the actual application itself, where you're kind of, there's lots of, places on the actual, if the school that you're applying to uses the common application, there's lots of places where you can kind of just have to free write, right? You might have to write in your course schedule. You might have to write in the names of your teachers. You might have to write in maybe additional information about your school. Also pay attention to that writing as well, because sometimes what I saw in my experience was that a student would have amazing, beautifully written and edited essays, but then I would kind of start to see a little bit less English fluency in other areas of the application that they hadn't edited, right? Or that they hadn't had a friend or a parent or a teacher kind of go over because they were so focused on making those essays sound great. They kind of forgot, or, maybe are just rushing through. And, obviously when you're rushing and it's not in your native language, sometimes you make, small errors or mistakes. So just be mindful of, as you're going through the entirety of the application, every part of it, to just, have somebody proofread it and just really, kind of be, methodical about the information that you're putting in.
I think that's a great point, Danielle. Thanks for bringing that up. And I'm actually going to expand that a little bit too. For all students that are applying, you really want to also make sure that things like capitalization and punctuation all make sense throughout your application. The number of times, like Danielle said, that we've read beautiful essays, but then all the activities on your activities list, everything is lowercase. And that it just looks odd. And it makes us wonder, okay, this is how you write when you're not paying as much attention to what you're doing versus how you write when you are paying a lot of attention and getting other people to look at your work. So it is really important to be mindful of that. that. And even in your communications with the admission office as well, if you are emailing questions with an admission office, go over that email one or two extra times before you hit send. Make sure first and foremost that you're sending it to the right college. We've had students that have sent questions, when I was at Holy Cross, we would get questions that said, "Dear Boston College Admissions Office." We were not the Boston College Admissions Office. So really be mindful of those little things in your communications with universities as well, because they can stack up over time against your favor if you're not paying attention to those things. Awesome. Okay, so those are all the questions that we've gotten so far. We just got a new one. Great. We have about 4 minutes left. So this will be our final question. If any of you do have additional questions that you would like to ask, please feel free to email us. The main Logic Prep email is on the screen right now. It's contact@logicprep.com. I'm also going to be sending out a survey link after the webinar tonight. So please take a moment to take a look at that survey, fill it out, let us know how we did and how we can improve. And we'll hope to see you soon at our next event as well. So our final question, is there any disadvantage in the admissions process if a student is undeclared in terms of a major? I think this is an interesting question because I think it depends a lot on the university or the type of university that you're applying to. So I'd love to hear what you guys think.
Yeah, I think really it depends on the types of school you're looking for, right? At a liberal arts college, they'd be a-okay with you being undeclared. I think there's like an interesting stat somewhere out there that at most liberal arts college, the major that students indicate that they want to major in, about 50% of them change while they're actually on campus. So liberal arts campuses and curriculums really embrace that because that's kind of the fabric of the experience.
I would say in my experience as, somebody who worked at a large university with a lot of schools and colleges and majors, both as an admissions officer and then also helping students apply to those colleges, I can definitely say from my experience, especially from the NYU perspective, I would always actually recommend to students strongly, if there is something that any major out of the hundreds of majors at a school like NYU that even has a little bit of interest to you, and you can, you've maybe had a little bit of experience exploring it in some way, shape, or form, declare a major. Just because at a big school like NYU, at least in my experience, undeclared was probably the most popular major that students applied to. So it just created this huge pool, right, of students that, again, we're not making that direct comparison between students, but it just meant that for that specific undeclared major, there was just no way that even if you were an amazing student, the best fit, it's just that much harder because you're applying for something that is so overly applied to. It makes it a little bit harder to get to the top of that applicant pool, meaning that, we're going to be able to 100% press an admit decision on your application. So I would definitely recommend, if you're applying to some of these larger schools, really, really try to think about applying to a specific major or college. If it really truly does not feel authentic to you, then that's okay. But then I think in your application, there should also be some, additional context, like in your, why NYU essay or why essay for a bigger school, as to what exactly it is that you are hoping to maybe explore in terms of like different topics and different majors and things like that, just so that we can get a sense that that you are intellectually curious and that you're excited to come in and kind of hit the ground running and start taking classes in different areas to find that specific major. So that's what I would say.
Awesome. And one final thing I'll add to that too is just a reminder that at most US colleges, you have a lot of flexibility to change your major, to even do an internal transfer to a different school or different college within a university. And so even if you are applying to a large university and you're not sure what you want to do and you just sort of pick something, just know that you are not stuck with that thing for 4 years. So if you get to the school and you realize you actually want to major in something a little different or transfer into a different school, that's totally possible in most cases. Something just to keep in mind about that, if you are looking, let's say I've had students that are interested equally in business and engineering, and those are oftentimes more selective programs than other majors like, let's say, psychology or biology. And so if you're trying to go if you're thinking that you might not stick with the thing that you want, it's sometimes better. This is going back to what we said before. It's sometimes better to apply to the thing that is more selective, so that if you get accepted there and you decide you want to transfer out of that program, it's a lot easier to transfer from a more selective program into a less selective program at the same university than to try to go the other direction. But in general, it's pretty flexible in most cases for students. So the major that you choose on your application does not have to be the major that you graduate with 4 years later. All right, I think we've cleared our questions. We've hit our time for the hour. Thank you all so much for coming and joining us this evening. I had a lot of fun chatting with all of you and working with Steve and Danielle on this presentation. So I hope this was helpful for you. Again, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with our survey. Please take a couple of moments to fill it out. And also, please let us know if you have other questions that didn't get answered tonight. So thank you so much. We hope to see you soon.
Thank you all.